Hello, I'm Matt Cupal, founder of Pitch Six. I'm here with Fallon and Leif. Fallon, we've done a couple segments with her on kind of her training goals, and she's set up, done some assessments with us. And then we brought in Leif Gasch, who's owner of Substrate Climbing and Coaching, Climbing Performance. And so we're going to collectively talk about a training plan for Fallon and take into account some of her constraints. But without me going through it, we're going to maybe invite Fallon to give a little bit of, remind everybody what her background is and what her goals are.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, I've been climbing since 2003. I started doing some coaching in 2013, mostly coached youth teams, and now I mostly do mental performance training. So the physical side of things, the really nitty-gritty technical stuff with physical training, I'm actually really excited to talk about, which is part of the reason I was excited to join Force Board and be involved with this. I primarily sport climb and trad climb, and I live in southern Utah and just try to climb as much as I can. Yeah.
And then maybe Leif, a quick intro from you too.
Yeah, hi. My name is Leif Gasch. I'm the owner of Substrate Climbing Performance. I've been climbing for over 30 years, coaching and training for the last 10. I started coaching mostly because I hit a plateau in my own climbing and needed to figure out a way to get better. And so I entered into the training space and found that I really enjoyed kind of digging into those nuances like Fallon was just talking about. And I love doing that with other people. I love working with other people for that reason. So we can kind of find those soft spots where we can, fill in the gaps, so to speak. So yeah, excited to be part of this project as well. This is great.
Awesome. Yeah, and we're using this as a demonstration of, we're adding some coach capabilities into the Force Board app. And so we're using this as a demonstration of some of those things. And how you might use them in your own training to develop your own training plans, or use somebody like Leif to develop a training plan. So Fallon, tell us, remind us what your goals are.
Yeah. I've done 52 outdoor 512s and I still haven't sent a 513. So I would love to do my first 13. I've gotten pretty close before on some, but I just tend to be an on-site or die kind of person. And so I'm trying to make a concerted effort to do more projecting and select some projects. So I've got a couple around St. George where I live that I have in mind. And then I also am going to El Potrero Chico again in Mexico in December. So I'll be 4 months post-op from ankle surgery. Hopefully my ankle will be ready, with the goal of doing El Sendero Luminoso, which is a really sustained 512 plus multi-push there. So that's kind of one of my big upcoming goals. And then beyond that, just building my pyramid and trying to do more 512 trad as well is a big goal for me. And just maintaining my body. I have HCDS, this connective tissue disorder. So one of my goals is to just stay healthy, keep my joints strong and resilient, which is part of why I'm using Force Board.
Yeah, and you mentioned, just for background, you mentioned ankle surgery too, which adds a twist onto this training system question.
Yes. Sorry. Number 4. Yeah, I've had a lot of ankle surgeries, but it should be all good. They said I can expect a full recovery. So.
But it does impact your training right now. Like jumping off a boulder is not so good. You're struggling to weight it even for ground floor pulls.
Yeah, I got the pull down package, so I can do that. But yeah, no like deadlifting or like squatting or things yet. I'll have to kind of ease into that as I get cleared for different levels of activity. But yeah.
And so just for the background, so a lot of people were training with Force Board, especially they're doing floor pulls where you stand on a plate and pull up against it. And because Fallon has some issues with weighting that, we actually shipped her what we call our pull down package, which is an A-frame that suspends the force gauge above you and you can pull down against it. So she'll be using that for this phase.
Thank you. Yeah.
But yeah, Leif, you wanted to jump in and ask what questions you would on background for coming up with the training plan.
Yeah, sure. I love your goals. That's awesome. I like that you're well-rounded. That's fantastic. I work with plenty of people. I don't think there's not a right or wrong answer in terms of, what people are psyched on. And I love when I hear that people are interested in basically growing in all areas of your climbing, because, this is such a multifaceted sport. So I think that's fantastic. I kind of want to go through the goals. Obviously the ankle thing is a big, it's a big issue, but I will say this, there's lots of ways that we can train around injuries. That's one of the things I do on a daily basis, is work with people who say, yeah, I have this, this thing I can't train around. How do we continue to do that? And there's a lot we can do. In in terms of your goals, you said you want to climb 13A. That's awesome. That's a very respectable grade. Do you have any projects picked out right now in the St. George area?
Yeah, I've been trying to climb every route on Chuckawalla, and I only have 2 left, which are the 2 13s on the left side of the wall, 3 bars black and Stalloner. Apparently Stalloner is like 13 plus now, so that might be a little bit more long-term, but 3 bars black, I think I could do fairly quickly once I'm healed.
Okay.
And then Churtline, I guess it's 13B, not 13A, but that route really inspires me. That's in the Blank Cave, so that's a big one I'd love to do. And then other than that, not totally sure, like locally. I'm kind of treating Sendero Luminoso as like lumped in with that goal, even though it's 12 plus, just because it's so many pitches of 12 plus like stacked on top of one another. And I'm going for that in December. So that's
remind me, Fallon, is that 18 pitches total?
I think it's 15 total, but it's like the first like 8 or 9 or something that are like really stacked.
Yeah.
Matt, you've done it, right?
Yeah, I've done the first 6 or 7 pitches. Most people go to pitch 5 and then come off that ledge. And we got there and did pitch 6. I was on-sighting everything, but it takes a lot of time was our constraint. And I got tired after 6 pitches of 512 too.
You don't say. The cool thing about those 2 goals is that we can definitely do something where we combine the training for both. You mentioned at the beginning of your introduction that you've done 52 512s and you want to do the 513. Have you explored what your pyramid looks like in terms of like mass volume of your 512s?
Yeah, I log it on 8A just as a way to keep track for myself. And it's interesting, I've on-sighted and flashed most of the 12As and Bs that I've done. So I know I'm capable of climbing harder. I just need to like actually dedicate myself to a project. The 12D I did in Logan actually was one of Matt's FAs from a long time ago called Paleface. I did like a shorter variation of it. And I got pretty close to the 13A, like full version of that last year.
Awesome.
So definitely want to do more, but this spring I was able to do, I think 3 12Cs on my second go. So that kind of was boding well for doing more 12 plus or 13 minus stuff.
Yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. I mean, the good news is we've got plenty of time to build up basically, when we look at this for things like 13A, like those 2 projects that you mentioned, I've done both of them. I know them very well. I think those are great. Those are fantastic routes, both of them. And one of the things that we want to do when we're talking about building out a training program is certainly look like long-term, right? We can only do things in the immediate, but I definitely like to take a long view of training plans and say, okay, like how can we set you up really well for, and that's why these 2 goals work really well. Like how can we set you up well for Sendero while still like working towards, maybe getting some really good quality burns in on these things in St. George. Volume is going to be a big key, as is just basically building up your energy systems, right? The fact that you're climbing like 12 plus second go, 12C second go, that's great. There's certainly some strength training that we'll want to be doing, obviously training around the ankle. But I like to make strength training only about a quarter, about 20-25% of a training plan. It is an important part of that. And it's a piece where that's where we can say like, oh yeah, where's your pulling power at? Like when we talk about, in particular, one of the things that I always a metric that I like to try and use is when people come to me with their peak force numbers. Basically, I want your peak pulling number to be about the same, 10 to 15%. When we see those 2 numbers differ like pretty substantially, that's where we know we've got some real room for growth. So that's going to be one of the things that we're going to want to work on. But also, like building up some explosive power, working on a lot of dynamic movement. That's going to be really critical for those projects. Now, that being said, that's kind of like a good way to think about how a training program might look is we'll have, like there'll be a strength component. That'll be, like I said, about 20-25% of the program. There's going to be 2 kind of, like you could think of them as almost like power sessions, one more static and one more dynamic. So static power is things like the freezing drill on the wall, right? Where you're freezing in between holds, doing that sort of stuff, very controlled movement, working on a lot of body tension, that sort of thing. Again, this is going to translate really well to the immediate projects in St. George, maybe a more dynamic power day. That can look like a lot of different things. That doesn't necessarily have to be on the wall bouldering or doing anything like that. We can do that, you know, working, like keeping your foot in mind. Last thing we want to be doing is landing anytime soon. So
yeah. And I agree with the long view too. The ankle's a short-term blip, you know,
yeah.
longer term, like I'm thinking all the way to spring right now. So I'll be fully back at it soon enough. So.
And then the last component of that, which is really, I think this is where you're going to be able to really shine. And this will be great training for building up for Sendero, is going to be kind of like a power endurance capacity day, a volume day. And the cool thing with those, like those kinds of sessions, is we can do a lot. There's so much we can do with route climbing, certainly, but this is a really great chance to focus on kind of like energy systems and how we display power and technique over a prolonged period of time. And that's going to be something I'm definitely going to want to work with you on, is understanding like, okay, you know, how you're only strong for this amount of time. Like, how can we make sure that you can do that over and over and over again? And the cool thing about that is, you know, we don't have to push fast. That's something that comes over a long period of basically consistency, you know, and that sort of thing. So, yeah, I think you're already set up. You've got a great base built up for what, you know, you need to be doing in the spring and then in this fall. But yeah, there's definitely going to be some fun things that we're going to get to do in terms of, yeah. And again, mostly it's going to be a lot of climbing. You know, that's the cool thing. I think a lot of people think of training as, you know, going into the gym. And I mean, there is a component of strength training, you know, where you're deadlifting and, you know, pressing and that kind of stuff. But the bulk of what I do with climbing training is climbing, and just climbing very intentionally with very specific goals, you know, in each session. So
I agree. Yeah. Getting the right adaptations is the best way to do it. So awesome. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you come up with and putting it into practice. It's been quite a long time since I've had someone like train me. And so I'm really looking forward to that. I think it's going to be a cool way to explore my limits and see how it translates to projects. There is one other multi-pitch locally I forgot to mention. That's a goal of mine that hasn't had a free ascent yet. It's a 13B. I've done all the moves on it and I'd love to climb it, but that'll also be kind of a similar to like Sendero thing in terms of, yeah, needing those energy systems to be serving me for a longer period of time. So that'll be to work on.
Fallon, we went through before and did the peak force and critical force assessments. We'll look at the results of those in just a minute, but tell us your impression of those tests.
Yeah, they were really fun. The peak force is super quick. I mean, you warm up and then how hard can you pull, you know, for a few seconds, and it just sees what the max is. So that was fun. I was kind of recovering from like a flexor tendon thing at the time when I did it a couple months ago now. So I should probably retest sometime soon. But that one was good, the peak force. And then critical force was hard. That was really grueling. You saw in the video, I was like, ow, like dying, you know, 5 minutes straight of pulling was pretty exhausting. It was really interesting, I think, too, because of that connective tissue disorder that I have. I felt like I couldn't really give it like full try hard for the full 5 minutes without hurting myself. I didn't want to hurt a tendon. And so I felt like I was holding back a little bit, but then at the very end, I kind of wanted to see what was in the tank. So on the last rep, I actually pulled a little extra hard just to see what was there. So that's kind of an interesting thing when you look at the very last rep. But yeah, I don't know. I knew it was going to be tough, but I didn't realize just how exhausting it was going to be. It felt like forever trying to do it, but it's a good way to kind of, you know, represent what it's like to climb a hard route, I guess is the idea, right? So
I would agree. It's emotionally exhausting. Just how willing you are to continue to try. 5 minutes in is it's an interesting journey.
Yeah.
Let me show a little result from her. So present screen.
I like the way you put that, Matt. It's an interesting journey.
Yeah, it's a journey. It feels like a journey because you're 3 minutes in, you're like, okay, I'm done. And then you have to summon that effort for another 10 reps. It's hard.
Yeah.
So you pulled, I think it was 201 pounds, right?
Yeah, on the peak.
That's on the peak force, 2 hands of 20 mil edge, and you were using the pull-up system. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And we've tested probably 400 women with this, and I've done some number crunching on that, and we have probably about 20% of those women about 10% of women exceed 200 pounds. So you're up there in the top 10th percentile already. This chart is actually something we're building into the ForceBoard app in the next release, which is going to come out any day now. And this is showing your strength to weight ratio. So this is peak force divided by weight, and then versus flash bouldering grade here. And that's Fallon's dot, the big orange dot there. And it shows that the dotted line that kind of goes across this is the average of all the people that are in this chart. And there's men and women both in the chart. And you can see that she's a little bit below the line, which means she, to a small degree, leans on skill to be able to get up a boulder problem rather than strength to get up a boulder problem. And actually, this is pretty common for us to see with women. They tend to be, because there's men on this chart too. The women tend to be a little bit below the line. The men tend to be a little or a lot above the line. So there's no right or wrong answer to this. You can be a skilled climber, you can be a strong climber, you can be a balance of both. And Fallon's got a pretty good balance of both here, which is perfect. This is her max bouldering grade. And you can see that she's kind of like almost exactly on the line there for that peak force strength curve, skill versus strength curve. So it's a great place to be because you're getting everything you can out of your body, which is awesome. And we have peak force versus climbing grade down here as well. There's a little less correlation between peak force and route climbing ability. I don't have the critical force charts here, but those are going to be in the next release of the ForceBoard app, and you can take a look at those for yourself as well as, for yourself, I guess.
Yeah, so, I think this one's particularly interesting too, because I tend to lean towards like really vertical techie kinds of routes, not super like burly stuff. And so for me, it really does tend to be more of a technique and strategy thing. So yeah, it's kind of interesting to see, but I'm glad to see I'm still on the line at least. That's good.
Yeah.
I thought I was going to be like way lower. I was like, I rely a little too much on skill because I've been climbing for such a long time, but I'm not the strongest by any means. So yeah, that's cool to see.
Yeah, so absolutely adding some strength will help you. And as Leif was talking about earlier, of course, skill matters a lot too in this sport. So that's that. And I don't know if, Leif, you kind of outlined a general approach that you want to put towards a training plan, and we can get specifics in a blog post and talk about specifics, but do you want to outline in a little more detail what you might propose for a training plan, or help us?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So, I mean, it's really interesting, looking at those charts. I mean, I do think that that's really useful data. It's really useful information. I do agree with you on the critical force. One of the reasons the correlation at least with the peak force, versus like route grade versus critical force and route grade. With the peak force, anytime we're climbing a route, there's just so many factors, right? The time under tension changes so dramatically. And, huge factors like how well do you recover? How much energy are you expending over the course of the route? What's the route type? Is it, like you said, Fallon, is it steep? Is it, vertical and technical? Like what muscles are you using primarily to move yourself up the wall? Like it gets hard to kind of like draw comparisons there. But, one of the first things that I always like to see is, I like to assess people and say, okay, where are you at strength wise, whole body? Again, working around the ankle, one of the big movers for me in strength training for climbing is less pulling power. I get some kickback on that a lot of times. People are like, oh, I want to do like heavy pull-ups. And anecdotally, I have yet to find an athlete that can do a ton of heavy pull-ups that climb significantly better than everybody else. Like it just doesn't seem to be the same thing. So when I talk about strength training with athletes, a lot of times, one of the things that I really like to lean into is posterior chain strength. Obviously we get a lot of that from things like deadlifting, but there are some other things that we can do too to continue to work on that, mostly because our posterior chain is where the vast majority of our body tension comes from. Everybody thinks of core as our abs. That makes up about 20% of our, core strength. So I would like to see a strength training day for you that would incorporate some pulling, but I think also just based on kind of your history and what your goals are, I don't see max pull-ups or like really heavy loaded pulling being something that's going to be super necessary for you. I could see doing something more duration based, interval based with pulling, in particular, like horizontal rows, that type of training versus overhead pulling.
That'll help protect my shoulders too, because I've had some shoulder issues before when I've done a lot of weighted pull-ups, so I have to be cautious with those anyway. And my lats are really overdeveloped compared to the rest of my body. So I think pulling is like more of a maintenance thing. And so I would agree with you that kind of giving some variety, attacking some other areas might be the best.
And what we find too is that oftentimes horizontal pulling is more applicable than overhead pulling when it comes to route climbing in particular. Maybe not so much with sometimes with bouldering, but oftentimes with route climbers, some sort of horizontal row progression tends to just produce better results on the rock. So, not to get too into the weeds with that, but yeah, I'd like to see a strength training session with you where, that we're doing maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks, every 10 days, something like that, where we're doing some, we'll work on some pulling. Again, working with the force board and regular finger maintenance, I don't love like heavy max hangs. That's if somebody really wants to do them, I'll program them in. But in general, I'm much more for resiliency. We used to think that really loading the fingers up and like loading up a ton of heavy weight was really good for us. And we're learning as more and more data comes out that that's not actually the case. As long as we're loading the fingers, we're going to get adaptations. So especially given your connective tissue issue, I think just, long game, slow and steady. I think that's going to be fantastic. And being able to do more repeater style programs where, you're being able to pull for longer durations and, very gradually increasing the loads. I think that's going to serve you very, very well for these goals, being able to crimp a lot over and over again all day.
These multi-pitches are definitely going to demand that. So I agree. That sounds great.
So what would this be? Like a 7-3 repeater protocol, or what sort of repeater protocol would you suggest?
We can look into that. There's a lot of different, modes and methods out there. I've actually started working a lot more with a 1-to-2 work to rest ratio when it comes to repeaters, just because the whole idea of repeaters is we want an increased time under tension, not necessarily heavy loading. So doing like something like a 6-10 or a 7-13 kind of setup seems to work. You can just display better strength for longer when you have that longer rest period. And again, we're not necessarily trying to because truly finger training is strength training. We're not trying to mimic the climbing, basically the time under tension that we're going to be experiencing when we're climbing. We're just looking to get maximum adaptations cellularly in the fingers. And if we can make sure that we've got at least a 1-to-1 work to rest ratio with the fingers, you'll just recover better. And one of the reasons I really like doing a protocol like that is it's safer. We run much less risk of any sort of injury or, overuse type of stuff, which, especially when we're thinking about training for, months on end, working towards this goal, we want to make sure that we're, progressing nice and slow. So I think for you, something like that might work really well.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Yeah.
Total grips, how many, give us a sense of what you would suggest for number of holds, number of sets and reps, that kind of thing.
Oftentimes if it's a beginner that's climbing, I'll just stick with a 20 millimeter edge, 25 millimeter edge. We know now that there's really not that much difference in terms of force generation between 20 and 25 millimeters, just kind of across the board. So, which is great, 25 safer. For you, Fallon, because of your goals, in particular, your 513 goals, I would want to make sure that you're working with at least a 2-finger and 3-finger pocket grip, as well as just a small edge grip. I don't think that sometimes I'll work with athletes and we'll work on slopers as well, just to build up contact strength. I don't know that that's going to be super applicable for you, but I would want to make sure that you're getting some dedicated time, getting comfortable on 2- and 3-finger pockets in particular, chert line moving on up. That's got a couple of small 2 fingers up on the head wall when you're tired. Being able to take those things and command them is going to be important for that route. So I'd say probably a 3-grip protocol would probably be pretty good for you. Maybe 2-finger, 3-finger, and then just a 4-finger crimp.
Cool. Yeah, sounds great.
So yeah. Oh, go ahead, Matt.
You total reps would you do in that scenario?
Yeah, I usually, again, it kind of depends. But I would say, if we do 2 sets on each grip, with between 5 and 6 sets per grip, that would probably be enough. One of the things I've noticed too is that if with athletes just from a mental standpoint. If we're grinding too much, a lot of people don't like finger work. They find it mundane and monotonous, and they're like, oh, I get kind of bored with this. So I like to keep any sort of finger training that we're doing within about a 15 to 20 minute block of time. Anything beyond that, I feel like, which we can go beyond that, that's great, but people tend to it gets wearing after a while. So, one of the things with training is we want to be consistent, day to day, session to session. And you're going to be more consistent if you're psyched to go in and you're like, well, maybe finger training is not my favorite thing to do, but I'm going to go in, I'm going to punch it out. It'll be done quick. And then I can move on to the other stuff. So
that speaks to the resiliency, right? If you can do it regularly, you're going to stay consistent. If you stay consistent, you can be more resilient.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's going to be one of the things too, that we talk about just in the macro scale of the training program, is the consistency piece. This sounds kind of silly, but 10 crappy workouts done regularly will do more for you than 4 really excellent workouts will sporadically, and I'm sure you found that too, Fallon, in your coaching as well.
Oh, so something's better than nothing.
Yeah, being able to be consistent with that stuff. And, even if we see just a little bit of, tiny gains or plateaus throughout the program, that's okay. Like if we can be consistent with that and you're, we're motivated and the big thing too, like, especially with your fingers and the fact that you've had some, connective tissue problems in the past, we want to make sure that we're taking this very slow, very steady. Anytime we're doing 4-finger work, I worry a lot less. But when we start isolating digits, especially down to the 2-finger, or certainly 1-finger pockets, we need to be very, very cautious about how, I guess, quickly we adapt that part of the programming, slow and steady again on that. So, I think for you, some dedicated pulling, we'll work around the ankle issue in terms of, your squat pattern and your hinging pattern. We want to make sure we're getting those in. I would also too, just for the volume of work and the volume of climbing that you're looking at doing, I'd want to make sure we're doing a lot of antagonist strength exercises for your shoulders and mobility work, just to make sure that, whole body, you're feeling good, because as you get healthier and as that ankle heals up, you're going to be able to get outside a lot more and start pushing more. So we want to make sure that, there's no weakness or imbalances anywhere.
Yeah, definitely.
So,
let me understand kind of the macro level of this. How many days a week? She's going to climb a bunch, right? So what's the mix of strength, like large muscle group strength training versus finger training versus on rock climbing?
Yeah, great question. So I usually like to incorporate finger training on strength training days instead of on climbing days, mostly because I like to make sure that on climbing days, we're taking the time to work on skills and energy systems. I feel like those are the best uses of climbing time when we're dedicating it for that. So keeping the finger training with the strength training, I would say that, that session will probably look somewhere between 90 minutes, 60 to 90 minutes tops, no more than that. We want those sessions to be brief. We want them to be as intense as we feel is appropriate, and then we're done. In terms of the other sessions, like maybe some power building sessions in particular, working on some dynamic and explosive work. I think that's going to be very, very critical for the projecting phase for the 13A projects. Both of those routes have big dynamic moves on them that are very isolated between holds. So working on, applied body tension on the wall and working on, being really explosive in between those sequences of applied body tension is going to be really, really important. And that's going to look like a lot of drills on the wall. And the beauty of that is that can be done, certainly on a bouldering wall, but also on a rope. And, for your case, like we want to avoid, being, hitting the ground. So there's lots we can do with that too. That fourth day, that fourth kind of endurance or capacity session, that is going to be more volume based and less difficulty based. So that's going to be looking at very specific intervals where you're climbing or working out for X amount of time, and then you're resting for X amount of time. And we're going to track that very diligently to make sure that, we're staying within those kind of like work to rest ratios. And those are the days where it's a lot of fun. We can do all kinds of things. We can speed climb, we can do back-to-backs, we can, work on some hard moves and then resting. There's lots of different ways that we can do that. And we'll be able to figure out more of that once you actually kind of get into those workouts and sessions, and we'll be able to say like, oh, all right, cool. Like we know that Fallon's really tired after 30 seconds. So we need to find some sort of resting period, that kind of stuff. based on how often you want to climb, I would say, 2 to 3 days a week tops for training sessions. How often are you climbing now? Just like as much as you can. I know you're.
Yeah, 3 days a week. Yeah, it's
Okay.
pretty typical for me. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that feels like a pretty good volume for you. That's like, you're not super fatigued after that. That gives you enough. I mean, I think that's a great schedule.
Yeah. I think I usually need 1 or 2 rest days. It depends on how hard like my strength training days are. Like sometimes I need an extra rest day after those before I can climb again safely.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think 3 days a week is pretty reasonable for me right now. If I'm doing a lot of outdoor climbing, I also guide. I didn't really mention that. So when my ankles heal, I'll be doing some guiding again, and that's like really easy, like 5-7 kind of stuff. So my number of days climbing will go up, but it'll be like really easy. So
okay, perfect. So the cool thing is there's actually a lot of on the wall work that we can do on your climbing days. So I think to start with, if we say we're going to train 3 days a week, I think that's plenty. That would also give you an option to get out and have a recreational day if you want. But and one of the things too that you'll find that I'm pretty adamant about is that we do not need to stick to a calendar schedule for a training program. Everybody thinks that it's like, I got to train Tuesday and Thursday and Saturday, and then I get my Sunday and Monday rest days, and I start the program over. And the reality is, like, I bet you have a life outside of climbing and training. I bet sometimes you're tired and you don't sleep well. So paying attention to those sorts of things is really, really important. I will always stress quality over quantity. And so if we can make sure that I kind of like to just keep it on a rotating schedule each week. And I say, hey, Fallon, it's Monday. How are you feeling? Oh, cool. You have this conference you need to go to. Great. Let's just push everything back a couple days. That's okay. I think people get really hung up on this idea that we have to be training on certain days. And if we need to do that for a schedule wise, and like motivational wise, that's fine. But there's a lot of flexibility in this. If we bump something back an extra day, or we say, you know what, I'm really tired today. I didn't sleep well last night. Great. Let's add another rest day in. We can do that. That is okay.
Yeah, I agree with that entirely. It's good stuff. I do trail run. So when my ankle's better, I'll be doing that. In the meantime, I'm just kind of doing like exercise, bike, cardio kind of stuff. Which days do you think that would be the best to incorporate that on?
What's the intensity duration of those? Like how long does that usually last?
Well, right now with the exercise bike, it's like 30 to 45 minutes, just trying to get some kind of cardio in while my ankle heals. Mm-hmm. Once I'm running more, it's usually like an hour or 2 minimum, sometimes up to like, 10 to 12 hours if I'm doing some like crazy link up.
Yeah.
General like regular sessions are just like be a couple hours.
Are you familiar with like zone 1, 2, and 3 intensities?
Yeah. A lot of it's going to be like zone 2 and 3 when I'm trail running. Right now with the exercise bike, just trying to like get my heart working a few times a week, it's mostly zone 3.
Okay, perfect. That's great. That's all really helpful for a lot of people don't know. I'm loving having this conversation because you're like, yep, well, I get this. I know that. Yeah, this is fantastic.
I have a lot of chronic illness stuff going on, so I have to be pretty in tune with my body.
Love it. Oh, that's great. So have you ever done 2-a-days before? 2-a-day sessions, training sessions, like one in the early morning and one in the evening?
Yeah, for sure.
I think you might actually I don't recommend that for everybody, just because it can be difficult to maintain that schedule. But based on like all of the things, kind of all the moving parts that you have going, I do think that might actually be a pretty decent fit for you. One of the cool things with 2-a-days is as long as you make sure you've got an appropriate rest period in between the 2 sessions, they're actually better in terms of like recovery, because instead of packing everything into a 2 or 3 hour training session, which was primarily what we used to do, if we can break it down to say like we're going to do a 90-minute session in the morning, or a 60-minute session, or hell, even a 45-minute session in the morning, and then a 90-minute session in the afternoon, that's great. So I would say, for your cardio days, and certainly for those runs, those like maintenance runs right now, or when you can, I don't see any reason why we couldn't do a training session in the morning, and then, you could do like cardio or running in the afternoon, evening. That would be totally fine. I think that would be plenty of rest period in between those two. I would want to focus on the skill work in the morning when you're nice and fresh, and then, doing that other stuff that's a little less skill specific towards the end of the day, but you should have plenty of energy for both.
Cool. All right. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe that's a good stopping point, because we've got a lot of reasonably specific, but not 100% specific stuff. And maybe what we'll do is write up an outline for this plan, and we'll post it as part of a blog post for this as well, so people can kind of, based on this discussion, go back and say, oh, this is what he's actually suggesting. I suspect there's always a little back and forth. You write up a plan and get together with your client, and you guys go back and forth on what really works or not.
I'm actually so good that I never have to do that. I just nail it right out of the way. No. Yeah, there's lots of back and forth. And you know what, with any good training plan, there should be, because as you get stronger, as you adapt to the program should adapt with you. You know, like there's going to be stuff in the beginning that feels challenging. And then after a certain amount of time, you go, oh, this is no longer challenging. We say, okay, great, let's move on past that. So, you know, being flexible and not being held to these concrete ideas is really an important part of you know, coaching and the fundamentals, as I'm sure, again, you know.
That's great. And yeah, I can tell, Leif, that one of the things you're good at, you're super in tune to who you're talking to and getting feedback. You recognizing Fallon's health issues and the fact that she's coached so much that you know, you've got a real good sense of who you're chatting with. It's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. It's exceeding my expectations. So I'm excited to work with you. No,
this is going to be fun. I think there's a lot of fun stuff that we're going to do, and hopefully I'll be able to, you know, kind of, you know, teach you some new stuff and work with some stuff that'll, you know, ultimately I want the program to challenge you. I want it to, you know, push you a little bit, but I mean, that's why we do this, but there's no reason we can't have a lot of fun doing it too. So
yeah. I'm excited. No one's pushed me in a while. So like I said, I'm excited. It'll be fun to have a coach again.
Cool.
Sweet.
Cool. Okay, so maybe that's a good stop. Any other comments, Fallon, from you?
No, I'm just really excited to see where it takes me and work hard.
Awesome. All right, so we'll write this up. Well, in everybody watching will see this, as you know, the post will come out with the video, so you can just look down and whatever the notes are below and take a look at that.
Great.
Thank you both for joining the call. I appreciate your hanging out with you both. It's awesome.
Well, thank you. I'm at home. I'm in my office, man. This is easy for me. You're the one out at the crag.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Matt.
I'm going up to suffer today on a project that I'm making backwards progress on. So I need to reset and do more training, less climbing.
Cool. Looking forward to it, Fallon. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you guys.